to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly.
Good morning, everybody. I bring you greetings from the southern tip of Africa. It's a wonderful joy to be with you again this morning. I was saying to young Soon yesterday that Malaysia is the country in the world that I've visited more than any other than South Africa. So it really is a wonderful joy to be with you again today. And Joyce, thank you for all of your arrangements in bringing me here. And it's a wonderful blessing to be with new friends and many friends that I've met over the years. Friends, I'd like to begin this brief input session that I'm going to do by asking a theological question. The question is, why are we poor? And you know, what struck me when I watched that video for the first time is the statement that we read in Psalm 24, that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. And I began to think, if the earth is the Lord's and everything is in it, and Philip says there, these particular people had access to the sun, they had good soil, they had water and hardworking people, why is it that some people are poor whilst others are rich? Now, the term hunger, it's a noun, it has two meanings. So the first meaning of hunger is the discomfort and weakness that's caused by a prolonged lack of food. And the second understanding of hunger is that it's a noun. Now, I want to talk a little bit about poverty and just one or two of the statistics around poverty in trying to answer this question from a theological perspective. Why is it that some are poor when others are not? Now, the first thing that we know is that there are 854 million people who are undernourished in the world. Annually, this was a very interesting statistic I found, Americans, I'm sure South Africans have something similar, spend $558 billion on takeout food. Isn't that remarkable? But the next thing that struck me was this statistic. There we go. 33 billion is spent on weight loss products. Isn't that remarkable? 558 billion on takeout food and 33 billion on weight loss products. Yet the same reality is that a child dies every 5 seconds due to hunger-related causes. Why is that? Half of the world's population, we will know, lives on less than $2 a day, and 1.6 billion people have no access to clean drinking water. Now, here's some of the information that we need to know. Providing malaria prevention to the developing world would only cost $4.2 billion. So that's about 1% of what is spent on takeout food each year, just in America. I mean, isn't that a remarkable thing to think of? 25 billion a year would be enough to give life-saving medical services to some of the world's poorest countries. And the cost of eradicating global poverty, think about this, is only 1% of global income. If we were to spend just 1% of our global income, we could eradicate global poverty. Now, this is a remarkable thing. And friends, I don't know about you, but this challenges me deeply as a Christian. Now, the truth and the good news is that there are people who care about these issues. You may be familiar with this. I was so pleased yesterday when Keith fetched me. We were driving in to see a nice big sign. I don't know where that is. It was on one of the turnoffs. That place. As we were driving in with the Millennium Development Goals. Now, the Millennium Development Goals, many of you will know these 8 particular goals, all working together specifically for one thing, to halve global poverty by 2050. The Millennium Declaration says this: we will spare no effort to free our fellow men, women and children from the abject and dehumanizing conditions of extreme poverty to which more than 1 billion of them are currently subjected. That's 1/7. 1 in every 7 people in the world is in abject poverty. Now, the thing that we need to know is that we do have the knowledge and the resources to make a change. But the question that we need to ask ourselves, particularly as Christians, is, do we have the hunger? Now, that particular noun that we have there says that hunger is a strong or compelling desire to do something. Now, the Bible is full of admonitions, encouragements, in fact, commands for us to be involved in this work of social transformation. Micah chapter 6 verse 8, which Keith, you led us so beautifully in singing this morning, says, "He has showed you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? But to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." Isaiah chapter 5 verse 16 is another wonderful encouragement to us. Listen to what the prophet Isaiah says. He says, "But the Lord Almighty will be exalted by his justice, and the Holy God will show himself by his righteousness." In fact, the very nature and character of God is displayed in the world through righteousness and justice. And we have a role to play as Christians in seeing that that comes to pass. Now, I don't know if you know this, but the word economics actually comes from two biblical words. Did you know that? It comes from the word oikos, which there means household. It's a biblical word. And nomos, both words used in the New Testament. Nomos, which means to manage. And the contemporary science of economics, which we are told is the science of managing scarcity, actually comes from a very different concept in the Bible. It has nothing to do with scarcity at all. In fact, it has to do with the management of the resources of the household of God. God is our parent, and we have a responsibility to be stewards that manage the resources of the household of God. And friends, I want to give to you today the statement that says that God has provided enough resources for us as a planet and the people of this planet to be able to survive. And as Christians, we have a responsibility for which we will have to give an account of whether we were good stewards managing the household of God. Now, in this Exposed campaign, which Young Soon mentioned, in our little promotional video, the people who put it together coined this wonderful little set of phrases which has really caught my attention. They said this: corruption has a name, poverty has a face, and you have a voice. And this is one of the most critical things that we need to recognize as Christians. Let me tell you a little story, just to illustrate the responsibility that we have for being stewards of the management of the household of God. A friend of mine, Alan Story, who's an activist in South Africa, uses this story often. He says once there were a family with 3 children and the parents, and the parents needed to travel to a different country for some work. And so they left the 3 children at home, the youngest child, who was very small, a middle child who was just coming into their teens, and an older child who was responsible. And they left the 3 children with enough money and enough food to be able to survive. Well, as it happened, I don't know if you have ever been the oldest child left in charge of others. Have you ever had that experience? The moment your parents leave, you say to the youngest children, "I'm in charge." Have you ever had that? And you say to them, "I'm thirsty, bring me something to drink." Well, that happened in this particular household. The moment the parents left, the eldest child began to take power. And as he began to take power, not only did he take power emotionally and socially, but he also began to use more of the resources. And eventually what happened was that the youngest child wasn't getting enough of the resources, and that child died. Now, can you imagine when the parents return and say to the brother, "What happened to our youngest child?" What will the oldest brother answer? He'll have to say, "Well, I utilized more than my share of the resources." But not only is the oldest child responsible, so too is the middle child. What role did that child play in advocating for the life of the youngest one? Lee Camp, a very outspoken Christian writer, says this about the church. The church then is called to be a community that follows the way of Christ. A community that is the body of Christ, that exists not to show the world how to be religious, but to show the world how to be the world that God created it to be. That's the function of the church. We are to be salt and light as He was in the world, so we are to be. Luke chapter 4 is a wonderful encouragement that shows us something about the nature and person of Christ in His ministry. Remember when Jesus gives an account of his ministry before he enters into public ministry. In Luke chapter 4, he quotes from the prophet Isaiah. Now notice the things that Jesus uses to describe his ministry. Advocating on behalf of the poor, caring for those who have health concerns and needs, liberating those who are captive, setting the oppressed free, and proclaiming the year of the Lord's favor. The third Luzon on world evangelization summed up this responsibility of the church when in the Cape Town commitment they said this. Young Soon, you were there. They said, God holds responsible especially those who are appointed to political or judicial leadership in society, but all God's people are to reflect the love and justice of God in practical ways for the needy. Tim Keller, in his book Generous Justice, perhaps one of the better known authors in our day, says this: justification by faith leads to doing justice. Now listen to this. And doing justice can make many seek to be justified by faith. Now perhaps this is where I want to end. Think about this. One of the things that we do as a church is we often tell people what the gospel sounds like. But wouldn't it be wonderful if we were people of the good news, who showed people what the gospel felt like, what it looked like, if we were able to embody good news? Dennis and I have to end with this one last quote, and it comes from Mr. Wesley, the founder of Methodism. And John Wesley said this to his preachers. He said, there can be no personal holiness without social holiness. In other words, we can't pretend to pray and honor and love God while there are those whom God loves who cannot experience his love. Thank you for listening.
You have shown us, oh God, what is good. You have shown us, oh Lord, what you require. You have heard all our songs of how